Well, that's getting warmed up. Good evening, everyone. First of all, allow me to thank Dr. Chayat and Professor Promiswell and the board members, Kevin and Kevin's show, Kevin and Chief Nolte, and my former partner, Kevin Hallinan from the Terrorism Task Force. This investigation is very special in my life. Certainly Artie did into a little bit of, he set the table pretty well in terms of what happened that day. We'll get into some more detail. But what he failed to mention, his bravery that day, because he's such a humble guy. And I'm so happy that he survived. He was shot and wounded that day. And Brian Lennon, his colleague, was also injured as the police car was ran to Mountain View Avenue. So, Artie, thank you for the bravery and for commitment to duty that day and afterward. So let's get started. This case, and you might hear this from a lot of different speakers when they come here, everyone thinks they had the most complex case ever assigned. I can tell you without a shred of hesitation that this investigation was extremely complex, as you'll see as we go into the slides. It's important to note also that the folks involved, the groups involved in this, were prior to this event known and unknown. Okay, remember that. We in law enforcement have the ultimate responsibility for identifying all of the nefarious types in our society that intend to harm us. But we only know what we know, as former Defense Secretary Rumsfeld used to say. So, the 1981 Brinks robbery and murders, absolutely there was a need, and this pun is very intended, for radical change. Okay, Artie mentioned it a little bit. We had to, after the dust settled, come to a focused resolve and decision to change things the way we approach these cases and these investigations. When I say we, I mean the entire criminal justice community and the impact that heinous crimes like this have upon not only the police, but certainly our prosecutors, certainly our correction facilities that are greatly impacted by this. So you hear that word today often, right? Radical. Some people are hesitant to mention that. I'm not going to get political here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. But it was definitely, at that time, not only a radical event of tragedy, but a calling for a radical change. The day of tragedy and transformation. As you'll see, as I get into my remarks, and I look forward to our exchange later on with the students and taking your questions, because 20 minutes, as Ira and I discussed, it's difficult to condense that into one succinct story. But I'll try my best. Okay. All right. So Artie started on this, but the armed attack on the summary events on that day, the Nanuet Mall, broad daylight, nice fall afternoon. The red van pulled up, opened fire without notice as Peter Page and his partner Joe Trombino were loading up the truck that was parked right next to the Nanuet National Bank. Page was killed almost immediately. Trombino seriously wounded. The other guard in the truck, although not wounded, as I could recall, by gunfire, the shattering glass with the shotgun certainly affected that individual as well. And they initially escaped with $1.6 million in the red van and fled. They went a short distance away and pre-positioned a U-Haul truck that was back there by some of their other Confederates and did the old vehicle switch. Obviously very well planned. By the way, this robbery that day was actually the third or fourth attempt as we got more information post-incident from cooperators. They had gone up there before and for different reasons aborted the robbery. A lot of planning always goes into these things. That's a consistent theme that you'll see throughout the investigation of terrorism and the formidable opponents that law enforcement faces. Good news, a young girl home from college looked out the window and saw this switch. Called the police, they put out the APB, U-Haul truck. She described the Honda as yellow. It was actually a tannish yellow, but that's okay. And the next thing you know, it goes out over the net, and as Artie alluded to, a roadblock was set up at the entrance to New York State Thruway. They see the truck, and not to get into a lot of detail, they pull it over as they should have. The two people in the front cab, who turned out to be David Gilbert and Kathy Boudin, both were the underground fugitives at the time, did a fairly good job of convincing Sergeant O'Grady and the others that, we're not, in any kind of trouble here. It was Artie who went around and wanted the back of the truck open. The back of the truck opened when the bad guys in the back knew that the gig was up, and they jumped out of the truck and immediately opened fire with shotguns, M16s, and 9mm. There were hundreds of rounds fired at that scene. Okay. Killed tragically Sergeant Ed O'Grady, Chip Brown, Police Officer Brown, and as I mentioned before, Artie was wounded and Brian Lennon injured to a degree in the car. 4 subjects were arrested attempting to flee the scene. Alan Cosley, is he here? No. Alan Cosley at the time, with I believe South Nyack PD, actually heard the APB and chased one of the, actually 2 of the vehicles, a white Oldsmobile and a tan Honda, and captured 3 of the subjects, David Gilbert, Sam Brown, and Judy Clark, after they crashed their vehicle in the village of Nyack. Captain Boudin tried to walk away to the scene down the thruway on exit 11, and an off-duty corrections officer who was alert knew something was awry, and he apprehended her. All of the other subjects escaped successfully, fled the scene. So, the response. Obviously, in a community, in any community in this country, disrupting it the way these subjects did is a huge event, okay? But the response was immediate, it was brave, it was massive, all right, from the entire Rockland County law enforcement community. All agencies, not only the local police, but the state police. We had FBI agents who happened to be in the vicinity that responded immediately, and it was a really focused, persistent, and intense response to this tragedy. Keep in mind all the crime scene work that had to be done at the Nanuet Mall, at the exit 11, the crash site, down in Nyack, etc. It also created the need for a special task force. Now, the Joint Terrorism Task Force that I'm proud to say I was an original member, was created May 19th, 1980, which preceded Brinks, preceded Nyack. That's why I'm getting old here, 1980. One of the original ones kept. But in addition to the JTTF being assigned members of the Joint Bank Robbery Task Force, we coalesced and from the FBI and the task force perspective, but a special task force set up in the Rockland County District Attorney's Office with their own investigative staff, local police, and FBI. And the creation of these task forces was absolutely necessary, but it created some challenges too, as I'll allude to. Very strong prosecutive support, both locally and federally. The sharing of intelligence and information, an absolute necessity, however, difficult, easier said than done. That's the real world, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to getting information to the right people on a timely basis. And very unique approaches. And I'll just mention one. Sam Brown, who was one of the defendants who was captured in that crashed Honda, he actually reached out and wanted to talk to the FBI, and it created a very sticky legal situation where we could not advise the district attorney's office. That always makes a DA very happy, right, about this approach, but it had to be to stay within the confines of the law because the federal law allowed an approach to this individual without violating his constitutional rights. I can't get into a lot more detail than that. I know there's no law class, and our district attorney might want to comment on that later. But it worked because the information obtained from that unique approach from Sam Brown was a concrete basis for obtaining all kinds of electronic eavesdropping warrants under Title III of the federal law. Sam Brown gave us information that only a participant would know that was corroborated independently and acted as a probable cause, not just for the Title IIIs, but also for subsequent arrest warrants. Of course, unique in many ways, but what adds to the uniqueness is that he didn't recant per se. He became afraid for his life, and he withdrew his cooperation towards the end and was subsequently tried. Okay. At the time, I can tell you most assuredly, as one of the principal case agents assigned to this matter, the most massive investigative effort ever undertaken by the FBI, ever in its history. All right? Evidence, the key elements, evidence collection and review, thousands, literally thousands of exhibits from the crime scenes, as I've mentioned, the searches of numerous safe houses in the New York City metropolitan area, but elsewhere throughout the nation that were identified as part of the network of this particular group. Seized and subpoenaed documents, telephone records. One of my favorite old terms you never hear anymore because everything's digital is pocket litter. Pocket litter is describes merely scraps of paper or notes that are found during the course of a search that can be very powerful evidence to prove a case. Okay? It was a domestic and international trail, thousands of witnesses, contacts interviewed throughout not only the country but outside the country. All right? And of course, another key element was the development of cooperating witnesses and subjects. I mentioned Sam Brown, but Kamal Bayeti, who was an acupuncturist at BANA, the Black Acupuncture Association of North America in Harlem. That was headquarters for the group. We were able to obtain electronic eavesdropping warrants. Tyrone Ryson, who was a member of the Action 5 for the family, cooperated, and his cohort, Raymond Oliver. 3 of those individuals testified at the federal trial in the Southern District. And of course, I keep mentioning extensive use of physical and electronic surveillance. There was 24/7, once we began to identify these folks, who was involved, who escaped from the scene that day, 24/7 surveillance, physical surveillance. That means on foot, that means vehicles, that means airplanes and helicopters. A very, very intense and a massive response to this tragedy. Okay, what were some of the findings? And there were many, right? A clear and present danger to the nation, to borrow, a term from a famous author, but it absolutely was true. Not that we were surprised. Many people thought some of these folks had gone away. Literally, the Weather Underground had gone underground, really underground. But lo and behold, this robbery and then connecting it with others that manifested through the investigation clearly showed that this was a major threat to our country. 4 principal domestic terrorist organizations that are responsible. The Black Liberation Army, that many of you probably have heard of. Republic of New Africa, which was another group whose goal was to have actually 5 states of the South secede from the Union and only be populated by African American citizens. And to do that by any means necessary, which is one of the favorite quotes of the radical left back in the day. The Weather Underground organization, all right, which was came out of the old SDS days, Students for Democratic Society, in the volatile 60s, early 70s, and was formed to take action, violent action, to achieve revolutionary goals. And of course, the May 19th Communist Organization, which was a close surface support group of the Weather Underground. However, they also were played dual roles, as you'll see from some of the members. The family operated clandestinely and collaboratively. The family was a group of select individuals from these groups that Matulu put together, Matulu and Sekou Odinga and Nat Burns principally. And they called themselves the family. How ironic and perverse that a term that is so near and dear to the fabric of our society, family, they had picked for such a pernicious and evil goal and method of operating. Criminal activity since 1976. The first armored truck robbery was Pittsburgh, actually. And two of the subjects were actually apprehended and did time for that particular robbery back in '76. And then, there's my superintendent. And then not your fault, but they were paroled. And guess what? They went back to doing things like they were trained to do, okay? The recidivism in the criminal justice system is something that the superintendent could wax more eloquently than I, but certainly we have seen that phenomenon in these groups, right? And a continued criminal campaign. So picture this. After Brinks, after all of this full court press, to use a basketball term, throughout the land, federal, state, local, these folks were so committed they began a campaign of bombings under a variety of names: the Revolutionary Fighting Group, the Armed Resistance Unit. They bombed the cloakroom at the U.S. Capitol. They bombed the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., corporations, and several others. So clearly indicative of a committed group. Okay, just some personages here that you may want to highlight. The subject on the top left, that's Donald Weems, Kwesi Balagoon, original Black Panther 21, escaped not once but twice from Rahway State Prison in New Jersey. Has anybody ever driven by Rahway State Prison off US 1? It's like, similar to, same with the walls, only maybe a little higher, I don't know. But out of the movies, out of the Jimmy Cagney movie, he got out of there twice, right? A cop killer dedicated to his mission. He's dead now. He died in prison after receiving a life sentence of HIV. Edward Joseph, Jamal, original Black Panther 21 BLA member, definitely there at Nyack, was acquitted of the major charges at federal trial, but convicted of accessory after the fact. That's a whole other complex story that I don't have time to get into in terms of trying to understand juries, okay, despite evidence presented. He's currently a movie producer, director, and is affiliated, like Boudin, with Columbia University, with their School of Film. All right, it's a great country that we live in. Sekou Odinga on the lower left, Nathaniel Burns. He was just paroled. Again, an original Black Panther 21, Black Liberation Army member, absolutely committed to his purpose. Was involved in a shootout 2 days after Brinks in Queens with the NYPD, who were going to try to locate a vehicle, a lead that came out of one of Maryland Park safe houses. By the way, he was shooting at the cops that day too, 2 days after Brinks. Sam Smith, now deceased, he was killed by the NYPD in that same incident. In fact, one of the slugs of Eddie O'Grady's .357 was found, recovered in Smith's bulletproof vest that he had on during the shootout with police. And ballistically, it was traced back to Sergeant O'Grady's weapon. And of course, on the right, and we can talk a lot about Assata Shakur, Joanne Chesmard, the queen of the BLA. Not involved in Brinks, but it's very important to remember. I talked before about impact upon all elements of the criminal justice corrections. There was an armed escape by these same people that broke Chesmard out of Clinton Reformatory for Women in New Jersey back in 1979. Right? The same people, the same group of people, the family, broke Willie Morales out of the Bellevue Hospital ward in Manhattan. We'll talk a little bit about Chesmard and Morales a little bit later. Okay, RNA. Atula Shakur, the mastermind, became a fugitive after Nyack, captured in '86, successfully prosecuted, is currently doing a life term in federal prison. Middle fellow is Cecilio Rodrigo Ferguson, aka Chewy. He was acquitted, believe it or not, at the federal trial of the murder. He had the M16 that day, okay? And he did 12 years as an accessory to these crimes and is currently out and on the street. The lady on the far right, that's Sherry Dalton on the Honda. Abdiodan, she is a fugitive charged in the Southern District of New York who's currently residing with Joanne Chesmard in Cuba. All right? Tyrone Ryson was a cooperating witness. I mentioned him before. He received a sentence for his part in the June 2nd armored truck robbery in the Bronx, and where William Maroney, another Brinks guard, was killed and gunned down. I understand that he may be presently out at this point. The gentleman in the middle, William Johnson, Bilal Sunni Ali, he was acquitted at federal trial and is currently now back in Belize, I believe. That's where we captured him with the help of the Belize law enforcement folks, but still committed to the cause. And then Sam Brown, who I mentioned. So Sam Brown was relatively, when I threw him in with the RNA, because he tagging along with the tools you call all the time, but he really didn't have a strong group affiliation. He was a local criminal, a burglar, a car heister. He stole cars for the group. He was very good at stealing automobiles. And they nicknamed him the chef, too, because he liked to cook. Weather Underground, a Marilyn Buck, who's now deceased. So they let her out of prison towards the end when she became terminal with cancer. But she was convicted of federal trial with Matulu and got sentenced to a life in prison. Kathy Boudin, many of you have heard about her. I know it was a very sensitive issue here in this county and elsewhere, for those of us who feel strongly about her involvement in this. And she arranged a plea deal through her attorneys, with the district attorney's office, so she didn't stand trial. And as a result of her being a good prisoner, she was paroled, and she's currently employed by Columbia University. So 2 of our subjects have gone Ivy. Right? David Gilbert, in lower. David Gilbert was a Weather Underground fugitive at the time. He's still in state prisons serving a life sentence. May 19th, Judy Clark. Judy Clark, right, was captured in that tan Honda. She had a history of violence with the Weather Underground on May 19th, and now there's a big petition to try to pardon her. And I know that's been the focal point of a lot of writing recently and reporting with respect to releasing her from her prison sentence. Sylvia Baraldini, interesting character. She's back in Italy. She was convicted at federal trial. 2 counts of RICO have 40 years, the max. Most you can get for a RICO conviction, racketeering influence corrupt organization, is 20 years. And she did 16 here. And then in an agreement between the United States government and the Italian government, because she was really an Italian national, they sent her back to Italy to do the remainder of her time. And after 4 more years, she's out, and you'll see her on video still preaching revolution and what a good person that she is. Susan Rosenberg at the bottom was never charged with Brinks, but she was charged with other crimes. She was captured with hundreds of pounds of dynamite and weapons in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, along with an associate. And she was tried and convicted on those charges, right? Again, the system works wonderful in this wonderful way. Prior to President Clinton leaving office, granted an official pardon to Susan Rosenberg and to some of the FALN suffers. A topic for another day. I know I'm not going beyond my time here. So the challenges. The challenges you face, right, are immense. The old cliche, drinking from the fire hose. Transforming chaos of that day into some type of organizational effectiveness. That's the job of law enforcement people. For you students that are interested in this, it's not for the faint of heart. Right? You're going to be faced with challenges and crises in your career. And this was a big one, all right? Centralizing and managing all of the information flow, huge challenge. Lead agency role. You know, you don't want to arm wrestle anybody. I talked before about the task force, but you have to have leadership in every operation you get involved in. And sometimes tough decisions have to be made. What's best for the case, what's best for the people, all right? Marshalling resources, I mentioned before, federal, state, and local. Hundreds and hundreds throughout the country. Coordination and control is a challenge. Prioritization of leads and the integrity of the information, all right? There's not a need for everybody to know, so you have sensitive investigative techniques going on. Prosecutive decisions. The DA versus the U.S. Attorney. Hey, I've been part of those interesting conversations, right? And the bottom line is you need strong people to understand, right, that if there's a piece of the pie, so to speak, for everyone to take, what's the most effective, fine. But sometimes it's best to go federal. Sometimes it's best to go state. And check your parochial interests at the door. A challenge in a big case like this. I've been involved in many. Trial, where do you try? And other legal considerations, okay? Results, lots of results. I just put a few up here. Certainly the identification of the subjects involved and their vast support network. Actually, 27 subjects were arrested in various jurisdictions throughout the country connected with this case. 4 successful trials, 2 federal, 2 state. During the course of this, you know, when you shake the bushes, things drop out. We found other, whether underground and BLA fugitives, including Anthony Nicholas Ward, who had killed a couple of NYPD officers, ambushed them, along with a Confederate who was arrested by the Philadelphia PD based upon our investigation. Creation of a very robust national domestic terrorist database, right? Very important to do it all. And the catalyst, as I mentioned, for effective change in combating terrorism as a whole. It raised, you know, tragedy always results in positive change. When the dust settles, when the anger and the disgust and horror of what's happened settles, after reasonable people get together, what can we do better to try to prevent this from happening again? There's no 100% foolproof way of doing that. However, positive change comes. The counterterrorism was raised even higher as a priority with the FBI nationally. The assignment of key resources, more JTTFs. It wasn't just after 9/11, after Brinks started to form throughout the country as a very effective tool in dealing with this problem. The criminal enterprise approach, I mentioned RICO before. You can't go after the individual. You have to look at the organization. And the RICO statute provides a very effective federal tool to do that. Right? The levels of proof are different. You can use predicate act state crimes as part of RICO. Right? And that's what we did in the federal prosecution. And that, by the way, is being used today still against formidable terrorism opponents. You saw the Levy guidelines. Attorney General Levy, not to go back into a lot of history, but you know, there was some abuses in the past. You know, COINTELPRO you've read about. Anytime there's an overreach on the part of the government, one of its agencies, what you're inevitably going to have is a reaction to that from Congress or from Justice, Department of Justice, or elsewhere. So they put in place these Attorney General Levy guidelines, and they were somewhat restrictive, not totally restrictive, but somewhat restrictive, and had a chilling effect on working what they used to call 100 cases, domestic security cases, all right? And so I'm not using that as an excuse. That's a reality in terms of tracking these people. When those guidelines came out, remember agents got sued, Felt Miller, and that probably predates some of you students. I apologize for that, but there was a big upheaval in the way you approach this. So the Smith guidelines came out after Brinks, 82, 83. And ostensibly what the Attorney General Smith, how they changed the guidelines in which the FBI can operate, they for the first time formed what they call a criminal intelligence investigation. That you don't have to wait for the criminal act to occur to give you a basis for investigation. You just have to gather sufficient facts, a reasonable indication that this group is involved in violence or intimidation or the threat of violence to further their political, social, or religious goals. That was a huge sea change. And as a result, you saw a lot more focus, a lot more cases opening up. And I mentioned that in the next bullet here, increased impetus rather than concentrated focus. This case, the Brinks case, established a lasting legacy of approach. It continues today. I had the privilege and honor of leading, before I retired from the FBI, I was the agent in charge of the counterterrorism branch in New York. 9/11 happened on my watch. Myself, my team, and many members of our task force that grew from 2 agencies to 26 before I retired, were all over the world chasing Al-Qaeda, using this approach, learning from the lessons of Brinks. And you had a lot of experience in the task force built from cases like this. Increased sharing of intelligence worldwide. The sharing of intelligence is absolutely essential. Okay, but also protecting the integrity of the information is equally as essential. And new statutes arise, extraterritoriality, authority for the FBI, other federal statutes that give you the teeth to bite into these groups. Okay, today's challenge, ever present, more complex, right? Just pick up the paper any day of the week today, turn on the news. Terrorism is here to stay for all of our lifetimes, unfortunately. It's a formidable opponent. We have to deal with it. The 1993 First World Trade Center bombing, the 9/11 attack, what does it tell you? You have to be forever vigilant. I often use a quote from Thomas Jefferson. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. and how you strike that balance between freedom and order in a law-abiding constitutional society. Real challenge. Technology, social media, hey, come on now, the bad guys got that down. Getting their message out, recruiting, even instilling people to act. We've seen it in New York, right? With people with no previously known membership in groups going out and doing bad things or attempting to do bad things. The authority and technical capability of agencies to gather vital intelligence. There's a lot of discussion on legal action right now, thank God, by the government to force the providers of internet service and you know the Yahoos and Googles and everyone else of the world to not encrypt their stuff, or to give law enforcement the key to encryption so that we can intercept communications that are going to hurt people and harm our homeland. And of course, the saga continues. So that's a picture. I told you before I was going to get back to Sada Shakur on the right, and no hands, no face, William Morales, as we used to call him. William Morales, an FAA-led member who blew himself up in a bomb factory in Queens. All right, and then as I mentioned, the same group broke both of these individuals out of prison in different places. Morales in a hospital ward, Chesmart in the Clinton Reformatory for Women in New Jersey. They both reside, that picture was taken in Cuba. We know where they live, we know their phone numbers. They have full protection, if you will, down there for quite a few years. Interesting, right? You just think about this, ladies and gentlemen. We just established, or we are reestablishing commerce relations with Cuba. Just took them off the state-sponsored terrorism list, took Cuba off, because why? Because Cuba was no longer supporting FARC, which is the Colombian terrorist group, or ETA, with the Basque separatists in Spain. No one mentions, at least even in the media, that that support also includes the support of these two nefarious individuals and others who were domestic terrorists in the United States. So something to think about in terms of, as we now reach out for another nation, how this is all going to shake out. And is justice really going to be served? Okay. And as I was proud and honored to write the inscription on the plaque that we gave to the Nyack PD to honor and commemorate the loss of Eddie O'Grady and Chip Brown. And I say this not only from the heart, sincerely on behalf of all of my colleagues that worked this case. They did not die in vain. Let it not be said they died in vain. Rather, that their ultimate sacrifice led to the enlightenment of the law enforcement community and, by the way, the entire country. And with that, I know my time is coming to a close. I probably went over a little bit. All right. Thank you very much for having me here this evening, and I look forward to our discussion later on. Thank you.